Greetings, everyone. Today I want to talk to you about General Daniel Morgan. In a previous video, I said that he was probably the toughest man in American history. I wasn't kidding. So in that video, we talk about the Battle of Cowpens, and we talked about continuity of fire. But I made a point that General Morgan had planned that strategy around the weaknesses of the militia. So I wanted to talk to you about him today, give you a little more context. So he was born sometime around 1735, maybe 1736. He's called the Old Wagoner. The reason he's called the Old Wagoner, it's kind of an interesting nickname. So when he was a young man in the French and Indian War, he drove a wagon. These guys were called teamsters. So he would be carrying supplies for the British Army. But he wound up at the Battle of Monongahela, which we have referenced in other videos. We are going to make a video about the Battle of Monongahela because it's one of the most overlooked battles in our history, especially because of the significance of it regarding a few important characters from American history there. Most notably George Washington. Daniel Boone was also at the Battle of Monongahela. In fact, some people think that Daniel Morgan and Daniel Boone were cousins. Daniel Boone was also a teamster. He drove a wagon at the Battle of Monongahela. But if you're not familiar with the Battle of Monongahela, it was a disaster. The French and Indians ambushed the British Army commanded by General Edward Braddock. It was a disaster. A lot of the British officers were killed. In fact, this is when Washington sort of became a national hero for his role in that battle. But we're talking about General Morgan today. So during the French and Indian War, eventually he does serve on the frontier as a rifleman. During that time in service, he punched a British officer in the face. The British officer had slapped him with the flat of his sword, which Morgan saw as an insult, turned around, punched the British officer, knocked him out cold. Well, for that insubordination, Morgan was sentenced to 500 lashings. All right, 500 lashings is ultimately a death sentence. It's a death sentence without sentencing someone to death. But Morgan didn't die. He took all 500 lashes, kept on living. He always joked that the reason he lived was because the drummer lost count and he only received 499 lashes. He also was shot through the back of his neck during the French and Indian War. The bullet went through the back of his neck, came out of his mouth, busted all the teeth out of the left side of his mouth. So you can see why I'm calling this guy a tough man. So he earned this nickname, the Old Wagoner. That's what they called him during the American War for Independence. At the beginning of that war, he was part of the invasion of Quebec, which was also a failed expedition. He ends up being captured by the British and later released. But he really starts to become famous during the Battle of Saratoga. If you're not familiar with the Battle of Saratoga, this is considered by many to be the turning point of the war for American independence. Now, personally, I do not consider the Battle of Saratoga the turning point. I still believe there were plenty of situations where the Americans could have lost the war after that. I believe there were still plenty of key victories after that. But the battle was significant. It was the first time that American forces captured an entire British army, a British army led by General John Burgoyne. It also was the battle that inspired the French and the Spanish to become our allies. But one of the things that made General Morgan important, and this relates to the Battle of Saratoga, hopefully you noticed, but the weapon that I'm carrying today is a lot longer than the Indian trade musket that you usually see me carry. This is an American long rifle. Some of you are probably wondering why I'm calling it that. Why aren't I calling it a Pennsylvania long rifle, or a Kentucky long rifle, or a Virginia long rifle, or a Southern mountain rifle? All right, we'll talk about that in another video. But I think just referring to it as an American long rifle is probably the best way to refer to this weapon. Morgan understood the value of this weapon. It could not be loaded as quickly as a musket. You couldn't attach a bayonet to it, but in the right hands, this weapon was special. In a skilled marksman's hands, you could deliver accurate fire at what was considered very long range for the time period. Morgan knew this, and he used this weapon to target British officers. So at the Battle of Saratoga, his Virginia riflemen, the men under his command, Morgan's riflemen, they were on horseback. They were able to beat the rest of the army to the battle, and they couldn't engage the British army the way an army would engage an army at the time. What he did do was tell his riflemen to shoot the officers. And so his actions at the Battle of Saratoga led to the death of General Simon Fraser, which is considered a key moment in the battle. And ultimately, we won the battle. Now, Benedict Arnold is really seen as the true hero of that battle, which, if you don't know a lot about American history, you probably still have heard of Benedict Arnold. So the fact that I'm calling him a hero might be shocking, because Benedict Arnold's probably the worst traitor in history other than Judas Iscariot. But he was a hero at Saratoga. We'll probably have to talk more about that later. But Morgan's riflemen played a pivotal role in that battle. Shortly after that battle, he retired. He retires in 1799. But after Horatio Gates' disaster at Camden, South Carolina, Gates being the guy who got all the credit for the Battle of Saratoga. So Gates is another American general. He's a former British officer serving in the American Army. He was the commanding general at Saratoga, so everyone sort of saw him as the hero. In fact, there were a lot of people that wanted to replace George Washington with Horatio Gates. But at Camden, South Carolina, Gates gets his army destroyed by British General Cornwallis's army. And like I said, it was a disaster. So General Washington had to build a new army. And so he sent forces down south under the command of General Nathaniel Greene and Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan came out of retirement to help Greene in the south. And that's what led us to the Battle of Cowpens, which we explained in that previous video. So Cowpens is probably Daniel Morgan's greatest victory. If you haven't watched that video, you should probably go back and watch it. But again, he uses American long rifles as a key part of his strategy, takes out a lot of those British officers, and then of course the militia fire their 2 shots and retreat before regrouping and re-entering the battlefield. And of course, we know that he had those cavalry troops under William Washington hidden, and he was able to pull off a double envelopment of Banastre Tarleton's forces and win the battle. Now, after the Battle of Cowpens, he retired again. Little did his men know, he was in extreme pain. Just sitting on his horse was excruciating, and people didn't know it. He didn't complain about it. But every moment that he was, on the battlefield, moving, marching troops, he was in agony. So he retires again after the Battle of Cowpens, which was in 1781. Later that year, George Washington's troops and their French allies were able to trap Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia, which ultimately won the war. Morgan did re-enter service in 1794. So 1794 would have been during the Washington administration. So by that point, we had the Constitution. George Washington was president of the United States. And the U.S. government had to put down something called the Whiskey Rebellion. So Morgan re-entered service for the purpose of putting down the Whiskey Rebellion, which was successful. They put it down. It was fairly peaceful putting it down once Washington's troops arrived. By the way, just so you know, Washington led those troops that put down the Whiskey Rebellion. He's the only acting president to ever lead troops into battle as a general. So that is a responsibility that the president has. Only one has actually done it that way. And then in 1797 to 1799, General Daniel Morgan served one term in the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives representing Virginia. So he did serve a term in Congress, and then he died in 1802. So I think he's one of the most interesting characters in American history. I said he was the toughest. I don't know if he was the toughest, but he was definitely tough. and his mental toughness and his physical toughness were key factors in us winning our war for independence. And so I think more people need to know about General Daniel Morgan. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. And we're going to do more videos about rifles, because so far we haven't shot any in any videos. But we're going to talk about the American long rifle, because I think it is an important weapon and an important part of our history. Thank you.